Bet the Board presents Stay Green. Stay Green is your first stop for all the metrics, matchups, and money-making opportunities at the track each race week. This is Stay Green, the NASCAR betting podcast. Here are your hosts, Todd Fuhrman and racing analyst Chris Werme.
Welcome into the Stay Green podcast. It is a racing trifecta this weekend, from Monaco to Indy to the crown jewel of the NASCAR series, the Coke 600. And we've got all of them covered, at least in some limited capacity, with, of course, the majority of the focus on the NASCAR race. A great interview with Bob Pockrass as well. I am your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined, as always, by professional NASCAR bettor, my esteemed colleague and co-host on this fine program, Chris Werme. And Wormser, look, we have to give NASCAR a ton of credit. They went outside the box. They worked with Goodyear. They tried to give us something different Sunday at North Wilkesboro. But the highlight was all about what happened after we completed lap 200. A little fracas, so to speak, between Ricky Stenhouse and Kyle Busch.
Well, it saved the day. I mean, we wouldn't have much to talk about after this race, especially on this podcast where, okay, we tried the tire didn't work. The racing was pretty boring. Fords are no longer slow. They're now fast. I don't know that you couldn't take much from the All-Star race other than it's cool that we have, I say we as in NASCAR, it's cool that we have it because we did get the opportunity to at least test something else. I give them credit for going out on a limb and trying, albeit wasn't necessarily super successful as, most teams, when it comes to, our best bet lost, weird that Chase Elliott just disappeared into the night and Kyle Larson beat him. But I was thinking that there's
full disclosure. We also faded Kyle Larson with Martin Truex Jr. That didn't work out much better. So
yeah. And I'll tell you another tidbit. Gosh, this is I shouldn't even be admitting this is I saw Jeff Gluck's tweet. He actually owes me money. The way I look at it is he said, because the heats were rained out, that Larson was going to be starting on the pole and there were odds up. And I trusted Jeff Gluck. I texted you and you corrected me like, maybe Gluck's wrong. But
I don't know if this sounds about right.
So I know Gluck doesn't listen to this podcast, but if you see him,
he has been a guest, and we are efforting to get him back on the fine program.
Yeah, we got to get him back on, and I got to tell him he owes me dinner, at least dinner, because someone did fire on Kyle Busch, albeit low limits, or Kyle Larson, albeit low limits, just enough for me to lose all of my matchups and my outright on him. And the week that I wasn't going to spend betting, I went over.
Hey, well, at least our listeners know that it doesn't take much to get you to fire on Kyle Larson. So this time you at least can point the finger at somebody else for costing you a few bucks. And, stage one, normally we set the table in terms of what we learned. But to your point, I don't think there were a ton of takeaways other than NASCAR's willingness to try some things. And sometimes before you hit a home run, you have to go up to the dish and strike out. So we can wave the green, white checkered flag on stage one for those folks who are listening to Stay Green for the first time. Stage one, the recap of what you just heard this weekend is All-Star Race. Stage two, normally a full race breakdown, but that'll get replaced by a great interview with Bob Pockrass, and we'll come back for stage three, Worm, and talk a little Coke 600 and what the expectations is English, not my first language. And because this race does have 4 stages, the only one on the NASCAR schedule, stage 4 will be we'll peel back the curtain in terms of what you think you'll see at Indy and Monaco. But we teased the Bob Pockrass interview at the top of the show. We may as well dive right into that, knowing that Bob was right in the center of the NASCAR world, as he often is on Sunday evening. Thrilled to welcome on the guest. We teased at the top of the show. If you're a NASCAR fan or a NASCAR bettor, you're glued to this man's timeline each and every day throughout the course of the week, and twice on race day to make sure that you know the comers and goers. I know a lot of people hang their hats on this man's picks as well on race day morning. You, of course, can follow Bob Pockrass on Twitter at Bob, BOB, POCKRASS. And Bob, before we get into some of the picks and such, I have to ask, in the wake of what you saw unfold Sunday, do we feel that that's your Miles Lane type moment when Mike Tyson did Evander Holyfield here? That you were front and center for the punch heard around the world that'll have all eyes on the Coke 600 come Sunday night.
Not only did I see the punch heard all around the world, but then I got the back of the guy who got punched, I think, in my face. So during all the pushing and shoving. So it was, I don't know if it'll be that big of a moment, because we've seen punches before. I don't know how many biting ears we've
Yeah, that's true.
seen in the past, but it certainly created a scene, created some memes and some photos that I think will be around for a long, long, long time. So I think the funniest thing is on my one of my profiles, I have there's a photo of me in the middle of the Jeff Gordon Brad Keselowski fight from about 12 years ago, and I have the same look on my face. So I kind of have oh man, S is going down face or something like that.
Hey, I mean, Bob, as long as you're consistent, that's the key. And I know Chris wants to ask you about some of the fallout that we saw NASCAR hand out on Wednesday in relation to that bout. But I have to ask, I mean, of all of the NASCAR fracases you've seen on pit road, I mean, is this even a top 5 moment? I mean, what would you say was the seminal moment when it came to drivers exchanging a little bit more than pleasantries, either during the race or after?
Well, I mean, I think, historically, everybody points to the 1979 Daytona 500. I would say when you talk about number of people involved, I would go to that 2012 Jeff Gordon, Brad Keselowski fight. You have the Clint Boyer Jeff
running
Gordon
through
fight in
Phoenix.
Phoenix. Yeah, Boyer running, and if you ever see video of him running through the garage, there's a video of me and a producer from ESPN both running behind him. So I can see myself trailing him, trying to hold my radio. He didn't have any radio, but yeah, that one was probably, I would say, one of the biggest. I remember a police officer telling crew guys, like, if you pick up that tire, we're putting you in cuffs, because that one was way, way out of control. And the reason you don't see a lot of that stuff now is NASCAR now has done, I guess you would call it a good job of, when drivers park on pit road after a race, they only allow 1 or 2 crew members by the car to help them get out and stuff. And they don't allow any others to come over until there's a brief cooling off period. So that way they keep some of these leads more driver to driver rather than involving all the crews.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of curious. NASCAR Twitter's clearly upset that Ricky Stenhouse got fined. They're, the very, I guess, quick NPC comment of, oh, they're going to use this to promote NASCAR and they're going to fine the driver. But we were talking a little before the show, and you just had a great quote where you said, well, you can get arrested for that. So the piece that you had on Fox Sports, I read earlier, I thought was great, where you said that NASCAR could have punched harder. Can you kind of talk about what you went into, or what your point of the article was there about that?
NASCAR, if a driver gets out of their car and punches somebody, usually it's no fine, no anything. They're like, there's a heat of the moment. You're in a car for 3 hours. You jump out. They want that emotion. But when in this situation, a driver had 198 laps to sit around and think about what he's going to do, that comes, that's like premeditation, right? And that's where NASCAR is going to get involved. And I think they should. I'm split. You don't want these guys just throwing punches all the time. So the way I feel, ran $75,000, but still, to me, if you throw a punch, you get a slap on the wrist, because you can't say that we want you to keep doing this all the time. But you also know, as the fans point out, they're going to use this as a lot to promote the next race. But NASCAR's a little bit different than other sports, because sometimes it's a soap opera that masquerades as a sport, right? We don't talk about why cars go fast. I can't interview tires. I can't interview engines. I can't interview brakes, right? So it's all about who wants to wreck who, and who's driving for their job, and who is not going to give this person a break, and this driver needs to win to save their job or to make the playoffs. So we don't write a lot about why cars go fast because teams aren't going to tell us how they make their cars go fast. So it's a lot of that kind of not off the track, but it's just the storyline soap opera aspect
Yeah.
of it really is one that drives interest in this sport.
What about Richard Childress's comments to Ricky Stenhouse? How do you feel about those?
Well, considering Richard Childress, I think, has the biggest fine in NASCAR history for a punch, and that was $150,000 in 2011 when he punched Kyle Busch. Remember,
Yeah.
Kyle Busch had wrecked one of his trucks. Richard went into the NASCAR hauler and said, "What are you guys going to do about it?" They said nothing. He comes out of his hauler, and this is about 30 minutes after a race. Not many people around. I didn't see this one, but he apparently gave Austin, his son, his grandson, he said, "Hold my watch." And he went over and decked Kyle Busch and got $150,000 fine for it. So I know everybody take Richard Childress at his word that if Stenhouse were to wreck Kyle Busch as he's threatened to do, that that he'd be in the middle of it. He'd go after Ricky. Although I will say this, Ricky I heard he was on Sirius and said that he has called Richard and trying to be like, "Hey, I'm not going to wreck your guy at Charlotte." So
Yeah, I guess
maybe,
final question on just this particular incident is, how does Ricky Stenhouse's dad work for the team, or is he just have a pit pass and found himself in a scuffle?
Yeah, he's not like a team member. I don't know whether he has any involvement with Ricky, like whether he drives the motor home or does anything like that. But he does have like an annual pass,
Like a
called
hard
a
card.
hard card,
Yeah.
and so that's been doesn't have that anymore, and we'll see how long it'll be before they tell him that he can come back inside the garage.
I mean, look, guys, when you see Ricky's dad get involved in the middle, maybe he's actually Ricky's strength and conditioning coach. I mean, that's not a small fella inserting himself right into that fracas and altercation. But definitely captivated a lot of non-NASCAR fans on Sunday, given that Joey Logano absolutely snoozed the field to the tune of a dominant win. And, Bob, you mentioned the inability to talk to brakes or to rotors or anything else, but tires have been a seminal discussion. And kudos to NASCAR. Chris and I talked about this a little bit at the top of the show for at least trying something different, where we saw some of the blistering on the softer tires during the daytime. It wasn't quite the same result that we all anticipated at night. But, what do you make of the ongoing dialogue between the governing body of NASCAR, the drivers, Goodyear, to try and find a way to resurrect the short track program that's essentially been the lifeblood of the sport, but been relatively anticlimactic since we've gone to the next gen car?
Well, NASCAR tried to change like various aero pieces on the car, and it didn't work. So they were like, "We're not just going to keep trying to do this. It doesn't seem like it's going anywhere." And the drivers are like, "Just give us some more horsepower. That'll help." And NASCAR says that's going to cost you all way too much money. So they don't want to go there. Then came Bristol earlier this year, where the tires unexpectedly were wearing out so quickly that it was pretty much a race of hoping that you weren't the one whose tires wore out first, right? You were hoping you weren't the one that brought out the caution, and that gave everybody, that really struck with people that, gosh, that was a surprise at Bristol. If you can make it so it's not a surprise, and for drivers to maybe have a little bit better ability to save and manage those tires, that would be the answer. Nobody was talking about horsepower after Bristol because they're never getting that fast, right? So so the result of the All-Star race was, man, it wasn't as great as maybe hoped, but it was a step in the right direction. And I feel like they're going to continue to work on this. Do they bring these tires to potentially New Hampshire in several weeks? We haven't heard, but there's certainly people who would like to see it and just say, "Hey, let's keep trying things in order to make the short tracks better." When you have your last two races as Martinsville and Phoenix, those can't be duds, right? You need them to be great races, and so I think they're going to continue to work and see what they can find else out on tires during the summer.
I mean, we can only hope, Chris. I mean, I know Phoenix is theoretically your home track, and you haven't been blown away with the racing product. Of
Yeah.
course, the schedule gets unveiled. We know that all three series will go back there for the championship in 2025. So, to your point, Bob, I think NASCAR needs to get themselves in a good spot, along with Goodyear, to try and raise the overall profile of racing product. But kind of switching from what we saw Sunday to some of the storylines that I know you're following. You put out a great piece earlier this week amid speculation of SHR and will they be involved next season? What exactly will become of their charters? Who will they be aligned with from a potential manufacturer? For folks that haven't read your article, what have you learned about SHR and their intentions to be involved in the Cup Series 2025 and beyond?
Well, we learned that they're still not telling us, but what we know is that the drivers tell us that they don't know who they're racing for next year, and they feel like that they're racing for their jobs. And talk to their members, they feel the same way. Stuart Haas is in their last year of their deal with Ford. It doesn't sound like Ford has given them a proposal that's great. Usually those things are signed before May of in the year before that would be renewed. So it doesn't look like that there's a renewal or a strong renewal in place. Stuart Haas lost both major sponsors, Smithfield and Anheuser-Busch, before the start of this year, and so they need funding. They need or they sell, and I think everybody believes that they're going to sell. They have 4 charters. Do they sell 2? Do they sell 3? Do they sell all 4? I would lean towards 3 or 4 right now from everything we're hearing. There's a lot of organizations looking for charters, Trackhouse, Front Row, 2311. And no, RFK would like to expand, although I don't believe they're in the mix here. And there's always others who are out there just kind of looking to see if potentially a star race team. So the feeling is that they should know in the next few weeks about what the future is, but next year, if there's no Stuart Haas racing, no way would be all that surprised.
It's such a wild time to figure out. I mean, we know the business side of the charters, and I won't claim to have any inside intel there by any stretch in terms of the valuation and the ongoing dialogue back and forth between the teams, drivers, and NASCAR in general. But, Chris, I feel like this is the perfect opportunity to segue into what I will define as the Kyle Larson portion of the program, knowing that there is no bigger fan of the 5-car week in, week out. And this week, you get a chance to watch Kyle Larson drive not one race, but 2. So letting you fire whatever questions you have at Bob about Larson and how he's going to go about executing at Indy and, of course, in the Coke 600.
Well, we talked a little bit beforehand, before we came on live, and discussed some of the challenges that Kyle will see when racing in the Indy 500. It's going to be a little different than hopping in a stock car and running at a track where he's run thousands of laps. So, what do you think the biggest challenges will be for Kyle Larson from a racing perspective at the Indianapolis 500?
His biggest challenges will be racing in traffic, and that's a great thing that he's starting 5th in the middle of row 2, because if he was back in row 6, 7, 8, just the turbulence and dirty air at the start of that race is immense and something that he's never felt in his life. So he is fortunate there. And the other is fuel mileage, and if it comes down to fuel mileage, he has no experience doing it. Now, a lot of these things there's a lot of data that they can tell him what to do, but just the fact that he has no experience in an Indy car doing that, I think could potentially hurt him, down the stretch.
Well, yeah, maybe Talladega and Daytona maybe helped him a little bit this year with all the fuel mileage talk. But now it's beginning to look like weather could be the biggest challenge. If there's a delay, what do you see happening with Kyle Larson's day? If there's unfortunately a chance of rain.
Yeah, I mean, look, Chris, you can tell Bob firsthand. You had mechanical problems yourself when you tried to race the double.
Yeah, I did
year,
Bob, I don't know if you know this. A couple years ago, I did the double. I went to the Indy 500, and then a buddy of mine was nice enough to book a jet for us to get to the Coke 600. And we had a mechanical issue, and so we missed the first half of the Coke 600. So I don't think that'll be an issue for him. At least let's hope not. But I certainly think weather could get in the way. And what happens if there's weather or a delay, or where are Larson's priorities?
Well, the official line is that the NASCAR 600 is his priority. The NASCAR rules state that a driver must start every race to be eligible for the playoffs. If they don't, NASCAR must grant them a waiver. you can't really get that until you decide that you're going to miss a race. So it's one of those things. It would be hard for me to imagine that NASCAR wouldn't grant it in this situation. They want their drivers to be known as some of the best in the world. The point of the rule is so that you don't win a race and then take 3 or 4 weeks off and come
Right.
back fresher than everybody else or focus on another race. So I would imagine he could get that way where Rick Hendrick he's sponsoring both cars, right?
Yeah.
his online motor dealership. So that makes it really easy to change your mind. Right? And when I
Yeah.
think, and as somebody who's been to several Indianapolis 500s, there's just nothing like it. And this will be Rick Hendrick's first. And I think he's going to see it, even if there is some weather. And he's going to be like, I can't take him out of this car. I can't take him out of that opportunity. Unless there's, unless something is that, well, it looks like the Indy 500 isn't going to run at all. Okay, we'll leave. Or, if they have a problem in on carb day on Friday, and maybe they don't feel like they have a chance to win. But beyond that, I think it's going to be. Rick admitted to me the other day that it's going to be really, really difficult for him to say, hey, you've got to end your Indy 500 quest and go back to Charlotte. So
I mean,
it's
oh, go ahead, Bob. I didn't want to cut you off. Go ahead, finish.
I was going to say it was, not going to Charlotte really cost him, chance for some playoff points and 70 regular season points. Remember, there's an extra stage in this race.
Yeah.
So, spotting by 70 points potentially when you talk about the regular season championship and extra playoff points that could go with that. It's something. But man, if you're a racer, there's nothing. There's nothing more incredible than the Indy 500, and that's nothing against any other race.
I
It's
agree.
just,
I
it's
agree.
just the way it is.
I mean, when you guys look at it, and Chris, I know we'll touch on this a little later when we do a real quick breakdown of the Indy 500. We've seen other drivers attempt this. I mean, Tony Stewart in 1999 finished 9th. When he ran the Indy 500, we saw Kurt Busch finish 6th. I mean, you've been around motorsports for a long time. Do you think Kyle Larson gives NASCAR the best opportunity to potentially put one of their top drivers into victory lane? And I mean, when we look at Kyle Larson from top to bottom, clearly odds makers are paying him a ton of respect. Depending on the shop, I mean, as much as a second or third favorite behind some of the biggest names in open wheel racing.
Yeah, I think I would say it's he has the best shot. And really, I think his best shot comes next year when he probably does it again because I've had that experience. But he's just so, I don't want to say he's not nonchalant, but he just does not get wigged out by anything. And he's not worried about the logistics too much. He's going to let other people make that decisions. And he tells us, hey, tell me where I'm supposed to be. Tell me what car it is and what track it is, and we'll go. And it's just, he has that innate ability to put everything else aside and just take what's given to him. And this ability to handle a very, very fast motor vehicle is just something that few people have. He's not going to be able to tell you how to fix the car, but he can certainly race it.
Yeah, it's so funny that you say that. I think I was more nervous for him to just try to get into the race, after he had kind of that engine issue or the plemlum or whatever they were called, where the engine was cutting out. I think I was more nervous than Kyle, because then after he qualifies and whatever it was, 233 miles an hour, he gets asked like, well, how fast was it out there? He goes, well, I mean, it's fast. And you're like, how do you play that down? Like, do you just have like ice running through your veins? You just unfazed by anything.
And the funny thing about that is, a year ago, when he went and watched some of it, and he comes back to the All-Star Race and goes, they were going 400. He's like, that's crazy. And he's like, I guess I'll be crazy with him. Like he knows how wild it is from the outside looking in, but once he gets in, he just has that comfort zone.
I mean, it's incredible. I mean, if he does go out there and pull off this victory, I think the next question that all of us will ask is, what kind of exemption will it take from Liberty Media and F1 to see him race Monaco try and win that and then come and win the 600 on the same day to fly across the Atlantic and pull off that feat. But I mean,
was saying that the best day ever is if they figure out, we get supersonic jets again, like we have with the Concorde. You could pull off the triple in theory as a fan. You certainly couldn't drive all three, but if you could watch the green flag at Monaco, the green flag at Indy, and then the 600, that would be the best day ever. The old triple.
I mean, Werme, you mentioned it. If weather's in the forecast, this would be the year. And I know you have your private jet on standby. So make sure you can get to Monaco, hope for rain, and the Indy 500 gets moved to Monday, and you'll have a chance to see the 600. But, the other thing, Bob, before we kind of let you go, and wanted to get in some of the storylines for the second half of the season, but, what kind of rumblings as we start to get glimpses of the 2025 schedule? I know we talked about championship weekend remaining unchanged, NASCAR's desire to go to a foreign country, and it looks like Mexico City would be the favorite over Montreal to be able to make that happen. But is there anything you can share in terms of the schedule, potential surprises that we may see, or is it more or less just, hey, look, this is business as usual. We're going to swap out a date or two, but NASCAR feels pretty comfortable with the mix that they have of short tracks, road courses, and of course the intermediate tracks as well.
Yeah, well, if they go to Mexico City and do road course, likely track that would lose a date is Richmond. So you're talking about potentially adding a road course, unless they, there's always that banter of does the roll stay or do they go back to that playoff race on a mile and a half oval, considering how great those races have been. I wouldn't be. I don't think there's going to be too many other big changes as far as new tracks. I would probably expect some shuffling in the playoffs. You've already seen Atlanta, which is kicking off the playoffs this year, is going back to the summer as part of that in-season tournament that they're going to have next year as part of 5-race stretch, which I think will create a lot of discussion, a lot of bracket
bracketology
stuff. But yes, bracketology, and that'd be fun. Gosh, they got it on a silver platter, right, with a couple 5-race broadcast deals. That if they didn't do it, they would have been, certainly a lost opportunity. So, and then I think, Watkins Glen is in the playoffs this year. I think they're still monitoring ticket sales there. They do that race from the summer to September. And I think, whether people can camp there as much in September as they would be willing to in August, I think is getting a little bit of scrutiny there. So could see some, some changes in the playoff tracks, but nothing too crazy or bizarre from what I can tell.
Any chance we head back to Joliet and Chicagoland?
I don't think so. Not next year. And that might be what we do get the feeling that the Mexico City race is still a little bit, it's going to take some work to get it done. So, that's one of those where I would say, well, if something falls through, then they know they have that race. And the problem with that is I believe that it's kind of plotted in the summer, and it could end up being pretty close to when they race at Chicago on the street course. So I don't know if they'd want to do that, do those around the same time.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, guys. I mean, the street course, I think I want to say, and Bob, you of course would know better than us, it was a 3-year deal. And if it's something that NASCAR decides, hey, look, we want to keep the novelty, we want to take it out of Chicago, but we still want to maintain that market, if that would be the driving force to go back to the mile and a half high tire wear, one of Werme's favorite tracks, to try and find an edge and an opportunity to bet. And last question for me, and then Chris, if you had anything, by all means, jump in. We're halfway through the season. We know everybody was ready to press the panic button for Ford up until a couple races ago. Suddenly that seems like an afterthought. And it was only not just last year, but the year before, where we didn't think Penske was going to be relevant in the chase. Lo and behold, they have each next-gen championship. What are some of the storylines you're following both on and off the track as we kick off the second half of the season with the 600 on Sunday night?
Yeah, well, it was here last year when Ryan Blaney won the 600, and you kind of want to see, are they going to be back like that on an intermediate, like a more traditional mile and a half track? It's definitely one I'm watching. I'm also watching William Byron. He had this great start to the year, but they just seem to be a tick off. So are they truly a championship contender? And then, the storyline that we follow every year, and that's is this going to be Denny Hamlin's year? Finally, possibly, right? Or are the racing guys just saying, no, not you're going to be one of those with all the wins, but not the big trophy?
It's wild to see. But Chris, go ahead. I'll give the final word to you if you wanted to pepper with Bob with anything else before we bid him a fond farewell.
Yeah, I guess to kind of piggyback I had a note that winning fixes everything, and everyone before Kansas was, well, Fords are down, Fords are down, Fords are down. The next thing you know, Chris Buescher barely loses in Kansas, and then you get RFK obviously running well at Darlington. Then Logano goes out and wins the All-Star race. So at this point in the season, now that we're past the Ford disappointment, where is the biggest disappointment from a NASCAR team perspective? Is it Trackhouse? Is it SHR and just their off the track issues? What's kind of the biggest surprise on the downside at this point in the season for you?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say, I mean, certainly the thing about you talk about SHR is that, Chase Briscoe, Noah Gragson have had pretty good years, and
I
they're
know,
better
yeah.
years than what they had last year, right? So that storyline is almost like, gosh, they're not running all that bad, especially for an organization where all the employees are looking to go somewhere else next year because they don't know what's going on. I would say
Logano, but then he just wins the All-Star race. I don't know.
the Star race, right? Yeah, I would probably look at. I mean, I would say Harrison Burton, even though the expectations weren't high, I think like you would hope that there would be some more strength in that. Zane Smith has been disappointing as a rookie.
Yeah, Zane.
So and probably you throw Corey LaJoie in there. He's getting outrun by Carson Hocevar right now.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's always interesting to see. We know, to your point, Werme, winning changes everything, and we love to overreact in NASCAR the same way we do in every other sport that's out there. So, Bob, can't thank you enough for your time today. And folks can follow you on Twitter at Bob, B-O-B, Pockrass, P-O-C-K-R-A-S-S. Bob, thanks as always, and enjoy a home game this weekend with the Coke 600, my friend. Great stuff from Bob. Can't thank him enough for taking time out of his busy schedule amidst following Kyle Larson, the penalties that were doled out that you had a chance to ask him about when we recorded early on Wednesday. But, Werme, as we go to the Coke 600, from some of the things that Bob laid out, following storylines, we know this kicks off the second half of the regular season for NASCAR. The longest race, 1.5 mile track, and that has kind of been, the bread and butter, so to speak, of what we've seen from these next-gen cars. When you look at Charlotte Motor Speedway, I mean, track comparisons, what are you using for data points before we get into some of the unique challenges of handicapping a race of this duration?
Well, I think you have to just go right back to Kansas is probably the closest comp we can use. Looking back last year, you'd want to use just historical data points at Charlotte, but this is not only just a regular 1.5 mile track, it's a marathon. And I think it's really important to understand more than just having speed in the weekend is being able to kind of survive this battle of attrition that is 400 laps that transitions from daytime to nighttime. Speeds are gonna change, shorten the run or early in runs from a hot and slick track to all the way to like a cooler fast track where you're going to see a lot faster lap times later in the race than earlier in the day. So adjustability is going to be really important, but I think you just have to, right now it's hard to look past just momentum. And right now the Fords seem to have a ton of it. They have speed, they have short run speed, they have long run speed, and they've done a great job of just not making mistakes. And I think you have to look at all of those things, not just track history when it comes to a race that's so much longer than every other track, but every other race, excuse me. But I would say the easiest one to look at would just be, Kansas. I think it's a pretty simple, and obviously track history at Charlotte matters a little bit, but right now I'm just looking at kind of momentum.
So does a race like this that'll cover 4 separate stages equally divided into 150-mile increments de-emphasize, in your opinion, qualifying? Or like we saw last year, I mean, William Byron consistently was able to pick up spots, having that first pit stall, ends up finishing second in the race, but was never a legitimate threat in terms of true speed to try and beat Ryan Blaney. How do other aspects of the handicap change, knowing that, look, even if you start in the back of the field, it's not a short race, to your point, so you're going to have ample time to potentially make it up? Or is putting yourself behind the 8 ball still as dangerous here as it may be for the end of the season race we'll see at Phoenix, where it almost feels like you snap your fingers and we're already into the start of stage 3.
I think, yeah, you're still going to need to qualify well. It's kind of an interesting thing to think about because there is high tire wear at Charlotte relative to some places, like Gateway, even Vegas, I think has less tire wear. But when you split these stages into 100 laps in the pit window on average 55 to 62 laps or something, you're just going to see one pit if one stop, breaking these stages up into just 2 runs if we don't see other cautions. So I think it will be easier for guys to stay on the lead lap because you're not going to see 2 green flag pit stops. We see 2 green flag pit stops at a place like Richmond, or even in Darlington, you'll see them have 2 pit stops. And whenever you have a bunch of different sequences like that, it's easier for, if you have a 110 lap run at a place like Darlington, you saw Kyle Larson get out to it like a 7-second lead because he was just that much better and in clean air. But that was through 2 pit stops, not necessarily 1. Whenever there's just 1 pit stop, it's just, are the cars going to be, is there going to be enough fall off for enough speed differential to make passes late in runs? Now, at Darlington, we only saw it happen in the last 7 or 8 laps of a tire run. If that's the case here this week, we are not going to see a lot of passing because you're only going to have 7 or 8 laps at the end of these 50 lap runs in each stage. So whenever you have like a nice clean break at 100 laps, it just makes the race really predictable. Now, a caution after lap 5 could change everything. But it's going to have to be something that falls in between like 5 laps or like 3 laps and 8 laps. Because other than that, you're probably going to come in and take tires every time. So I think it adds a level of predictability to this race, which is why we started betting it again. Before, when there weren't stages, this was a no bet race for us, just because there was so much that went on throughout the race, so much different strategy. The track went through changes. It was hard for cars to, keep up with the track. And now that it's a little bit more segmented in 100 lap little runs, I do find it a little bit more predictable.
Yeah, this is a race for those folks who may be tuning in for the first time. You're going to want to pack a lunch. You're going to want to pack your burger, everything else, because this race will not be over quickly by any stretch of the imagination. And you will see the track change from day to night, which always puts the drivers in a little bit of a challenging position along with their crew chiefs to try and set up the cars. I don't think it'll shock anybody, Worm, when you look at the odds board that Kyle Larson and Denny Hamlin more or less co-favorites for this particular race. We talk about how a longer term race will benefit a driver that has a good crew chief, that has skills that can adjust. They'll know how to make some of those tweaks. Yeah. But as you look a little bit further down the odds board, since we assume that the 5 and 11 will very much be in the thick of things, I mean, Martin Truex Jr. 10-1, Tyler Reddick 10-1, William Byron, who, as Bob mentioned earlier, not showing the best current form by any stretch, at 10-1, Ryan Blaney, last year's winner, 12-1, Chase Elliott 12-1, Brad Kay, Chris Bell, also 12-1, and then Chris Buescher comes in at 14-1 before we drop down into the 16 to 18-1 range. Is there a driver or two that you feel is particularly interesting the way they're currently priced that you want to highlight more than some of the others?
Well, we talked about I just think Chris Buescher, the sets up, it's just, gosh, he's had 2 wins, not taken from him, but man, the gambling gods owe him one, or at least the people that have been betting on him, they owe the gambling gods owe them one, and probably just the racing gods owe him one. But the reason I like Chris Buescher is this is a battle of attrition, and he's a guy that can hang around and be there at the end. A lot of his wins, he didn't lead a ton of laps. He didn't lead a ton of laps at Richmond. He just kind of found himself out front late and was able to hold guys off. When he won at Michigan, Truex was kind of dominating the race, and he finally got some track position. He was able to hold guys off. I think that Chris Buescher does an incredible job with a lot of pressure. He was holding off, a hard charging Reddick when Reddick got into him. So if you kind of put that, consider that along with the speed in the race car, and I like this Chris Buescher. The price opened at 16, down to 14 or 12-1 some places. I don't mind that at all. I'm going to let the week kind of play out a little bit more. If you have access to live odds, I think that maybe even just staying on the sidelines completely from an outright perspective, might be a prudent thing, because the track is, if you're fast right when the green flag drops, unless you're Martin Truex Jr. from, I don't know when he snoozed him in like 2011 or something
Yeah,
like
what
that.
do you lead? 398 laps, I think.
Yeah, it was just,
that's sure as hell what it felt like watching that thing.
oh, it was so boring. I mean, just an underwhelming race. And he's probably the only guy that could go out there and do that. You know that if Hamlin and Larson are out there leading laps, they're going to make enough mistakes to make it interesting. Whereas maybe a guy like William Byron could get out there and make it, kind of stink up the show from a, I guess, just an entertainment perspective. But then you go back to last year and you look at a guy like Ryan Blaney, who was out of nowhere just the fastest car. And so we'll see I don't know who that guy could be this year at this track. I think it's we're not going to know until we see these cars get on track and practice and then qualify on Saturday. But I think that of all the guys you kind of mentioned, I would say Chris Buescher has the most upside. It'll be interesting to see if Ty Gibbs can hang around, because he might disappear in the middle of the race. But if you find yourself just up there in the last few rows on a final restart, we saw 2 years ago, we saw towards the end of the race, it looked like it was going to come down to Larson and Chastain. And then the next thing you know, Briscoe's spinning out, trying to pass Larson for the lead. And then Denny Hamlin steals it from Kyle Busch. So a lot can happen in the last, let's say 30 laps or so.
This is the definition of a race that will see comers and goers. I mean, a
Oh,
guy
absolutely.
that's running inside the top 5, 50 laps in, may not exactly go out there and be able to keep that same type of momentum as we get deeper into the race. I mean, you mentioned Ty Gibbs. You talked a little bit about Chris Buescher. Ross Chastain, I mean, you look at his price tag at 18-1. I mean, he has one finish better than 11th over the last 9 races, and you begin to wonder when odds makers are going to drop his price enough to make him a worthwhile pre-week bet. Now, he did at least show a little bit of speed at some of the 1.5 miles of late, but still seeking his first ever top 10. And then we get into some of the tier 3 drivers. Kyle Busch. Look, we know the pedigree that Kyle Busch has, and I'm sure RCR as a team would love nothing more than to give the sport a nice big shit burger to eat this particular weekend, given what we saw in full. Joey Logano, look, hasn't been great at Charlotte in the Coke 600. Back-to-back finishes, 20th or worse. And then it's Bubba Wallace, Mr. Consistency with Alex Bowman, and a man who's quietly put together a bevy of top 10 finishes on the other end of that Kyle Busch altercation, Ricky Stenhouse. Are there guys outside of that price range, in that 20-1 or greater, that at least intrigue you, that you're curious to see how they unload, and you'd have no problem maybe adding them to their dance card if they look to show a little bit of speed, at least in practice?
Joey Logano. I mean, it's crazy that we're talking about the Fords having all this speed, and Logano's kind of the last guy we're talking about. I've talked more about Noah Gragson in the Fords from a betting perspective than I've talked about Joey Logano. He's getting priced in that 20-25-1 range. He's coming off a win. I know it was a short track and there was not a lot of passing, but if he was running the speeds that he's been, kind of running as of late, Denny Hamlin still gets by him. So I don't know if some of this Ford speed is kind of trickled down to the 22. Like normally it would start with the 22 and then trickle down to the 12 and then to SHR and then to RFK. But at this point, it's like he's the last guy of the Fords to find speed. I mean, we've even seen the 38 and 34 be faster than him. So I think that in a race like this, you got Paul Wolfe, who you want in your corner from a crew chief perspective. Joey Logano gets it out front. He's going to be hard to pass. And I think that 25-1, man, I don't care what track you're at. If Joey looks good or unloads fast or he qualifies in the top 5, he's going to hang around all day, and you're going to have to beat him in order to win the race.
Look, it's a guy that we keep hoping gets things figured out because you love more drivers bunching up that top of the field, because there has to be some win equity placed somewhere to try and be able to take advantage. So we'll see if the 22 can start to figure things out at a true driver's race this weekend, but you do need speed to kind of keep it up front during some of the prolonged green flag runs. We'll wave the green-white checkered flag on stage 3. It won't be the full checkered flag, because I did promise a stage 4 around these parts. And I know we kind of teased the Indy 500 a little bit, Worm, about Kyle Larson trying to accomplish the double, the amount of respect being paid to him in the odds market amongst some of the pantheon of the best IndyCar drivers going now. You've watched practice, you've watched qualifying. What's kind of stood out to you, and what may be some of the things that you're looking for, knowing that you typically don't bet a ton of open wheel racing in IndyCar, but you aren't afraid to get your fingers fingers. I'm trying to think. Put your toes into the deep end of the pool as it pertains to the Great American Race.
I don't know what the hell you just said, but
Or the
I'm going
greatest
to talk a little
spectacle
bit
in
about the
racing,
Indy
whatever the hell they
500.
call it. I'm butchering things right now. You
Oh.
want to talk about this being a war of attrition? I'm fading fast as we get to stage 4.
And you got to go live on the radio in like 15 minutes. So Indy 500, by the way, if you're a race fan, it is one of the greatest spectacles you'll ever see. I'm so glad I went. I don't know that I need to go again. Just the racing isn't, the viewing at the Indy 500 at Indianapolis Motor Speedway isn't as good as you would expect. Having done the double, I thought that the racing at the Coke 600 was way better than the Indy 500, but it is certainly fun to bet on. And it's so funny that I bet Larson only because I knew that everyone was going to bet Larson, and so I kind of stole a price at like 16-1.
Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend playing Larson at this point. If anything, gosh, I hate to say this, your wallet, you have to be betting against him. He's overvalued at this point. Now, could Kyle Larson go out there and win the Indy 500? Maybe. I
mean,
doubt it.
I'm curious to see, Worm, what matchups we get with Kyle Larson. I mean, are we going to get a matchup given the outright prices where the pole sitter and Scott McLaughlin is minus $120 against Kyle Larson making his IndyCar debut? I mean, is that something we can see, or are books going to be sophisticated enough going, you know what? We're going to eliminate some of the win equity in the outright market, but we're not going to give sharper bettors the opportunity to fade him across the board in some of the head-to-heads.
If they open him up against like Joseph Newgarden as like Newgarden minus 135, that number is not going to close minus 135. That number is going to close a little bit higher than that. I like here's what, if you want to have Larson in some capacity, I think you take him in maybe a top 3 or top 5 or a win capacity. And I don't think you trust him in matchups. I think it's really, he drives cars in, like, he bumps around in these open wheel cars. I mean, he's flipping and stuff. Like, Indy cars, they're so much different. You don't just have light contact in Indy cars. You obviously don't have light contact in some of the open wheel wing stuff he runs either. But in stock cars, you do. And you can't be doing that. As Takuma Sato trying to pass, gosh, who was it? The Scottish guy. I was in Vegas for this. You just reckon you're done.
You're going to ask me to recall some of the IndyCar races we bet. I mean,
I know.
You're
Anyway,
barking up the wrong tree.
I would say he's a guy maybe bet on him to win, but I don't like him in matchups. I guess I say that until we see him matched up against someone that struggled a little bit. But even then, I don't know. I can't see backing Larson in matchups. Guys, I do like that. I do think that there's some value in the outright market. If you're looking at the Penske's, are just rocket ships. I mean, Newgarden, McLaughlin, Willpower, those guys are really fast, but they're also really, really short prices. I like Rossi. I thought that he was really good in qualifying, and he has, I know that Larson's the best race car driver, at least in my opinion, in the world, but Alexander Rossi has the biggest nuts in racing. That guy will put that car anywhere.
Well, he'll try and stick it in there where there's no opportunity to be able to stick his nose in. That's
exactly. He'll be dipping his fingers in there, or whatever you were talking about. Like, that will be Rossi.
Good Lord, I can't even articulate myself right now. I should just end the show at this point before I say something else that's even dumber.
I think Rossi. I thought Colton Herta looked really good in practice 8. Scott Dixon, his prices come down. I think he reopened 20-1. After his poor qualifying effort, but he's down to 16. By the way, Scott Dixon's a good IndyCar driver. And then the last guy I think that presents some value would be Rinus VeeKay. He always finds himself kind of up front late. Not a great qualifying. Well, actually, it ended up being a good qualifying after a rough start. So those are the guys in value. I have a hard time taking a short price in the Indy 500. It's, you're, like Bob said, you're managing tires, you're managing race strategy, and, oh, by the way, save fuel and lead the race at the same time. So it's not like you're just out there pedal to the metal the whole way around. You're out there trying to manage a full race, and imagine someone telling you to try to go 230 miles an hour and save fuel. It just doesn't make sense to me. So Those are the
Look,
guys that I've just thought. I've only played Larson. I haven't played anything else. But if you're looking to throw a couple bucks, those are the outrights I like. I haven't seen matchup prices at this point in the week. Those should come out after Carb Day.
Yeah, I don't think, to your point, that we've seen matchup prices. And if it's like any other Indy race, we'll see about 45 minutes before they drop the green flag
Yeah.
for whatever
Ooh.
reason when it comes to Indy, even for a race of this magnitude. Last things before we get to the best bet, the first race of the day will be the Monaco Grand Prix. We know that F1 hasn't been the most competitive of motorsports, but we did see something last weekend where Max Verstappen didn't go out there and just dust the field. It was Lando Norris making up a ton of ground and actually losing the race by less than a second, something that is a complete 180 from what we've seen. And when you look at the odds, Max only, and I say only, minus $2 in terms of the widely available prices. You're looking at Lando and Charles Leclerc at 5.5 to 1. We know Monaco provides some different challenges, and you can make the case that it's going to boil down to where you put that car in qualifying will determine who ultimately wins the race.
Yeah. A little bit different than the Indy 500 and Coke 600, where you can definitely make your way through the field. The opposite at Monaco. I think that just the pageantry and the illustriousness, the
scenery.
optics of the race are probably overshadow the actual racing. I don't pay attention to F1 anymore for me to give I don't know.
I'm not telling you to
intuitive
make a
opinion.
pick. I'm not telling you to make a pick here. You could tell people why you don't bet it. That's perfectly
Well,
fine.
I just don't bet it because I feel like qualifying is where they're going to finish. Like one pass, and you'll have just the announcers going crazy, and that could be like from 10th to 11th or 11th to 10th or something like that, and they have to make a big deal out of it. So it's fun to watch. I get up and I watch it. I think I'm going to set my over under on beers for that day. Gosh, let's see. I'll start at 6. I'm going to say like 18 or 19 beers.
It's a good clip. That's a good clip for 12 plus hours of racing. So
that's if the Indy 500 goes. If not, it's still probably going to be close to 18 or 19. I'm not going to stop in the middle of the day.
I was going to say, I had no idea you were going to take a break after breakfast and go through 8 hours cold turkey and wait until they drop the green flag in Charlotte. So that's a little bit of a racing spectrum, one of the best days. And we can only hope for 3 competitive races and that all are somewhat lucrative in their own regard. But we'd be doing a disservice as we wave the final checkered flag here after stage 4, Worm, if we didn't provide a little bit of an actionable component for our loyal Stay Green listeners to get us back to victory lane. What have you seen so far with some of the early offerings across any of the 3 series?
Well, I think that from a best bet perspective, there's a Chris Buescher is minus 110 against Christopher Bell on DraftKings. And I like this Buescher side. I think that, they have a ton of momentum, and this sport over the last couple of years has really become momentum driven. Clearly the Fords have found something. RFK certainly has found something on the short run and long run. And the other thing is their pit crews have been phenomenal. I think that you have to, now more than ever, you have to put together a complete race. If you look at last week, look at Reddick. He just wasn't good on the long run, and that ended up costing him the race. He was good on the short run and awesome on pit road, couldn't get it done. You look at, Brad Keselowski had to get lucky to still win. He was arguably the best car in the long run, still couldn't put everything together, still couldn't win the race off pit road. So you have to make sure that you are firing on all cylinders to win. And if you tell me that Chris Buescher over a long race, it's going to be a grind, I want him on my side. I think that I expect him to run kind of up front all day. Now, you brought up a good point earlier before we went live, is Chris Bell's probably going to qualify well. So we might be going a little bit early. However, Buescher looked good in qualifying at last week, or excuse me, 2 weeks ago at Darlington. I expect both him and Brad K to qualify well and run up front all day long. Chris Bell, we know he's a high beta guy. He can go out there and lead a lot of laps, but he can also make a lot of mistakes. And if you got 400 laps for Chris Bell to make a mistake, you can pretty much count on one of those happening. And if it happens late, he's in big trouble. If it happens early, he does have time to recover, but it's still an uphill battle.
And we're not going to blame his pit crew, who once again, despite working on a very different race car than they did a season ago, won the pit crew challenge last weekend at North Wilkesboro. So a lot of ground, a lot of racing this weekend. And what's your schedule in terms of the pre-race pull, your level of potential sobriety when you jump on air? I mean, are we going 2 hours before? Is it contingent on the Indy 500? I mean, lay things out for our loyal Stay Green listeners that want the best, most up-to-date NASCAR content come Sunday of
So
Memorial Day weekend.
it'll be 4 p.m. Eastern, so 2 hours before the race, and that's 1 p.m. Pacific. And you gonna hop on for that?
I think I'm going to try and jump in there. I know people will be out at their barbecues.
They need a winner.
Yeah, exactly. They need a winner. There's no better way than they're spending quality time with their loved ones than to tune in, listen to us ramble incessantly about racing. Hopefully we'll be able to provide a recap of 2 fun races as they get completed as scheduled in Monaco and Indy, and then set the table for the Coke 600 as well. Maybe I'll sneak in a little hockey talk for one of the conference final games that get going. My condolences to your Canucks that you've adopted through marriage, coming up just short in Game 7. They're now on the golf course with my beloved Golden Knights, so we can be better first and foremost above all else.
Oh,
you can
follow. Didn't know. I'm an
ahead.
Oiler fan now. I've been a lifelong Oiler fan for almost 4 days.
I think they disown you in Western Canada if you decide you want to root for one of the 2 franchises in Alberta.
Okay, now I don't have my friends are all Canuck fans during the playoffs. They are all they've literally just taken off their Canuck jerseys. They all have Oiler jerseys now. It's which is the
most ridiculous thing ever, because if you talk to people in the GTA in and around Toronto, if the Leafs aren't winning the Stanley Cup, they're not suddenly rooting for the Canadiens, the Canucks, the Oilers, the Flames, or the Sens. They're going, you know what? The hell with it. We hope this Canadian Stanley Cup drought continues in perpetuity until our franchise is the one that can engrave their name on the cup. So I guess we'll see how all of that unfolds. You can follow Chris on Twitter at ChrisWerme15. I should have shared earlier in the show. You can follow me there as well at Todd Fuhrman. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And you, of course, can follow Bob Pockrass there as well at Bob Pockrass. But if you're a NASCAR fan or better, there's no doubt you are already following Bob at this juncture. All right, my friend, we've covered a lot of ground, done enough damage. Special thanks to Bob for jumping into the Stay Green hot seat for the second time in as many years. Great to get his perspective. He has forgotten more NASCAR history, trivia, and everything else than you and I will ever learn. So it's always a treat to get him into the mix. But best of luck this weekend to all of you, our loyal Stay Green listeners. Be sure to check out the NFL offseason podcast as well. Dropped last week. Brad Powers getting into the college football preview. Started with a little G5. For Conference USA, it is the perfect way to spend your holiday weekend should you have a commute in the mix, tuning in for about 45 minutes of college football gold. But most importantly, with a ticket on Chris Buescher in a head-to-head matchup over Christopher Bell in hand come Sunday afternoon into the evening, we'll see you at the window.